is it the American president bowing to pressure from some of his European allies?
It is the American president accepting that the situation on the ground has changed and accepting, too, that there is little question that Russia has the upper hand in this long, long war that he would like to have been over with a Ukrainian victory some time ago. The reporting at the moment is thin, and it is US officials talking to our colleagues at NBC News here in Washington, saying that President Biden has secretly given Ukraine permission to strike inside Russia, solely near the area of Kharkiv, that's Ukraine's second city in the far east of the country, right up near the front line with the Russian advance. That is the only detail we've got at the moment, but it comes after an interesting statement that Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, made just yesterday when he was in Moldova talking about Ukraine. And he said that one of the hallmarks of our support for Ukraine for more than 2 years now has been to adapt. He said, as the conditions have changed, the battlefield has changed, as what Russia has done has changed, we have adapted, adjusted, and I'm confident we will continue to do that. Well, what this is, I think, is precisely that. It is adapting to a fast-changing situation on the ground. It is now approaching the height of summer in Ukraine. That is the best time for Russia to be able to advance. It is also the best time weather-wise for Ukraine to be able to try and push back. Of course, Dominic, the dangers of this and the reason why hitherto the Americans have been very reluctant to provide Ukraine with weapons that would enable them to attack far inside Russia itself is simply that would potentially give the Russian president the ability to claim that America is attacking Russia proper. Two nuclear powers, the stakes would be very, very high. But this is certainly a very big decision. It's being described as secret. It's hardly secret now. A very big decision by the American president. He's talking, as I say, about areas around Kharkiv. Remember, the front line is very close to that, to the east of the city itself. The Russian border is only 30 or so miles to the north of Kharkiv. So the distances are not great. And what the Ukrainians want to do is to be able to push that front line as far east as they can. The further east they can push that front line, the narrower the country is there, and therefore the smaller or the shorter the border that they would have to defend if they ever came to some sort of resolution which would see them giving up some land.
Mark Stone in Washington, thank you for that update on breaking news out of the American capital, and more on that later in the programme. But let's head over to New York now, where the jury in Donald Trump's hush money trial is continuing its deliberations, 10 hours into those deliberations. Joining us from the courthouse now is Jason Miller, senior advisor to the former president. Jason, thank you for joining us. It looks as though the jury is taking this seriously, taking its time, deliberating over this. It's not doing what your team had urged it to do, which was to dismiss the case out of hand and declare it a mistrial. I assume that your man inside the building, he has to stay in the building while the jury is deliberating, is getting nervous now, is he?
Well, President Trump is very defiant in the face of this political persecution. The fact of the matter is I've been here in court with him every day for the past 6 weeks, and nobody has ever said what it is that President Trump supposedly did wrong. And so it's very clear this is a political attack. President Trump's numbers keep going up and up. And when Americans look and say, wait a minute, why are we spending tens of millions of dollars to go after the former and future president of the United States? We have things like inflation and chaos at the border going on. People do think that it is political.
Well, I mean, you don't think it's clear that it's been made clear what he's done wrong, but the allegation is that he's paid hush money to a porn star and covered it up for political gain, misleading the American public voters by covering this up. You also say it's political, but we now got beyond that stage, whether the judge is political or the prosecution. It is now in the hands of a jury, and throughout American history, justice is determined by a jury of Americans who are not politically motivated either way. we assume, and therefore it is now beyond that political stage. I ask again, is the president worried now that this jury is taking it seriously, not dismissing what he's always wanted to happen, which is for it to be dismissed out of hand and for a mistrial to be declared?
Well, Dominic, I do think that this should be dismissed because President Trump didn't do anything wrong. And the fact of the matter is, in the 6 weeks that we've been here, they still have not said what it is he supposedly did wrong. And I need to correct your framing of this. This is over an alleged bookkeeping error. That's what this is about. They're hauling in a former and potentially future president of the United States over an alleged bookkeeping error. And so, as we've seen with the judge having to reread his instructions yet again this morning, many people in the media, many observers, people who are watching this trial very closely are confused. It took some 55 minutes or so to go and reread everything earlier today. It's not clear what it is that President Trump is even being accused of. So I ultimately think that President Trump will be cleared. I think this will be pushed aside. And as we've seen with President Trump's polling numbers going up and up, we can't wait to get back on the campaign trail. This is all about keeping President Trump here in New York as opposed to a battleground state like Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania. We want to get back out on the trail. And to show just how political this is, the Biden campaign actually called a press conference and brought in the washed up Robert De Niro to try to attack President Trump. It backfired spectacularly. And so this has become a bit of a circus. We want to talk about the issues that Americans actually care about.
Well, it's certainly been a circus outside, but inside it's been a serious trial, hasn't it? And in his closing summary, Donald Trump's defence attorney, Todd Blanche, has put it this way. It says it doesn't matter if there was a conspiracy to try and win an election. Says it doesn't matter. Every campaign in this country, he says, is a conspiracy to promote a candidate. Is that the best he could do? It's pretty cynical stuff, isn't it?
Well, every single election that the Democrats have attacked President Trump with have been some aspect of a conspiracy. We saw in 2020, we saw what happened with the media companies colluding to silence the Hunter Biden laptop. That certainly would be a conspiracy, and I would like to see the CEOs of those companies hauled in front of a court or in front of a courtroom to explain why they did that. You look back to 2016 when Hillary Clinton tried to delegitimize the election, saying that the results weren't real. So Democrats have been trying to undermine President Trump the entire time he's been there. And let's not forget, many of the viewers in the UK will remember this. They tried Russia, Ukraine, one impeachment hoax, the second impeachment hoax. The entire time that President Trump has been on the political scene, Democrats and with, unfortunately, many of their colleagues in the media have been trying to undercut President Trump. Here's the difference, Dominic. This is why it matters, and this is why President Trump's numbers keep going up. We are so closely removed from having a great economy in the United States and having secured borders. Americans want that back. They see Joe Biden, who can't put two sentences together. You just talked about the chaos and the war in Ukraine. We see what's happening with the terrorist attacks in Israel. Americans are sick and tired of it. They want a responsible leader back in the White House, and that's why President Trump is leading Joe Biden.
Central to his defence is that Michael Cohen is a liar. Why did the president hire this man for so long if he thought he was a liar? And also, why has he hired you as one of his communications experts, someone whose life seems to have been full of scandal, lurid allegations of extramarital affairs, prostitutes, massage parlours? Are you the best person he could find to defend himself against allegations he paid hush money to a prostitute, to a porn star, I'm sorry?
Well, so we take a look at, obviously, on the first part of that. That's not something that I can address because there is an unconstitutional gag order that's in place. And so not allowed to go and address any of that. I do think that that's something that, quite frankly, President Trump should be able to speak his mind. He should be able to go and defend himself. And ultimately, once this case is over, I do think President Trump will be able to defend himself.
Well, he wasn't gagged. He was prevented from talking about witnesses, but he could have had his say. He could have testified, couldn't he? And he chose not to. So he wasn't gagged there. Kind of gagged himself.
Well, in the American legal system, you don't have to go and take the stand on that. But again, I'm going to leave that to the lawyers. I'm on the political side of things. And so, again, the American people are looking at this, and his numbers just keep going up and up. And so I think the American public has really spoken in this. I think that we're going to have a good outcome as it comes here, but now we wait.
And what about your own record? Scandal, a scandalous life, it seems, lurid allegations of prostitutes, extramarital affairs, massage parlours. I ask again, are you the best person that he could have found to defend himself in public against allegations he paid hush money to a porn star?
Well, as you go through, nobody in life is perfect. I think the job that I've done, both on behalf of the president, I think the job that I've done in my field makes me one of the top people in this arena. And I'm going to be out there and defending the president, who I don't think did anything wrong.
Just going back to the campaign itself, assuming that it's not derailed by whatever happens, whatever the jury decides in the coming hours and days, it's been described as a scrappier campaign that's being planned by Donald Trump. What does that mean? And is it a sign that he's going to play dirty? Can we look forward to a dirty election in the months ahead towards November?
Well, actually, that would be the Democrats, since they're losing so badly. And you see all President Trump is doing in reaching out and bringing Americans together. When you look on the Democrat side, that's where they tend to play dirty. Look at the fact that we're here with this politically motivated trial as we speak. That's what this is all about, Dominic. This is all about politics. President Trump is the one who's actually playing on offense. He's bringing together African-American voters, Latino-American voters. He's going to Democrats and Libertarian Party members and saying that we can have a great country once again, but we do not need to have such division in our country. Unfortunately, Joe Biden and the Democrats seem to go in a different direction.
What do you say to people outside of America? Many people who say to me, surely America can't be going back to the chaos and the shenanigans of a Trump presidency. People are deeply worried about that possibility outside of America as well as inside.
I think a lot of people around the world want to have peace in the world. They miss the fact that we had no new wars with President Trump, the fact that Russia did not invade Ukraine during President Trump's 4 years in office. We actually had peace in the Middle East, which is something that's completely unheard of, and there were no new wars under President Trump. That's what people want. And when you have a weak American presidency, which is what we see right now with Joe Biden, then you have a weak Western world. You have a weak democracy. And that's something that, again, whether you're in the UK or anywhere else in the world, here in the United States and voting, you want that peace back. You want a secure southern border. You want to bring that inflation rate down. We deserve that here in America, and I think the world could do with a lot more peace as opposed to chaos.
Well, we'll let you go back inside the courthouse and join Donald Trump as he awaits the outcome of the jury's deliberations, and we'll see whether that happens in the coming hours or days. Jason Miller, Senior Advisor to Donald Trump, thank you for joining us from New York.
Thank you.
Well, President Putin has warned that smaller nations in the alliance in NATO should be careful when considering whether to back a relaxation of rules on Western weapons. Earlier I spoke to the Foreign Minister of Estonia, which of course neighbours Russia. Margus Tsahkna told me his country would not be intimidated.
The situation is not good, of course, if you see the situation on the battlefield. But good thing is that we made decisions on a political level to support Ukraine more. But I'm concerned about the deliveries. But it's clear as well that the political decisions are moving in the right direction, in the meaning of Estonia has made already beginning of the war, that Ukraine has all the rights for defense and also has a right to target the military targets outside from Ukraine as well, if it's needed.
Well, you say that it's been given all the rights, but it's not in the sense that a number of your allies seem to be at odds, even with themselves, about the kind of rules that Ukraine has to operate under with the weapons it's being given by the West. Can it use them to fire at legitimate military targets beyond Russia's border? The Americans seem to be saying, although Antony Blinken says that it's up to the Ukrainians what they do, officially the line in Washington still seems to be that they can't fire those weapons at Russian targets within Russia. The Germans seem to be pretty ambivalent about it as well. Why can't the alliance make up its mind about this issue?
I really do hope that they will do it. And the more and more nations or countries they are doing as well. But I think that the problem is much more wider. And the problem is that in the western part of the world, we have not decided the goal of this Russian aggression, that actually Ukraine must win, but the other way around, Russia must lose and Russia can lose. And I think there is a fear of escalation, what Putin is using as a word. But my position is clear that if it's not escalation already right now, what is the escalation? And I'm not sure, and I'm absolutely sure that Putin is just using the words about nuclear power, but he will not use it because it has no practical reason, on military level and on political level, he's going to lose everything. So, and the other part is that I feel as well that we haven't delivered as much as we wanted to do and as much Ukraine needs. So, and there is no argument to limit the targets for Ukraine military to defend itself.
So what's at stake if that doesn't happen? If the Americans don't fall in line with the rest of you and the Germans don't either, what will happen in Ukraine, do you think?
It's just the one limit which is not helping Ukraine to win, and the consequences will be very serious for all of us. We are not talking about Ukraine only. We are talking about the aggressive behavior of Putin, which will continue. And also, I'm not talking here only about like the Foreign Minister of Estonia. We are the bordering country. But then we must be ready as well. This aggression is coming to our territories. We already have actually the hybrid attacks on all different levels. So we just need to understand that with these limits about targeting different infrastructures, military infrastructures for Ukraine, this is just giving them advance for Russia. So there's no arguments behind.
The big fear is, of course, that Russia uses tactical nuclear weapons, and that was seen as a fake threat. But they are now getting them out of storage and drilling them. And we've heard again today warnings from the Russians saying that the West should take this seriously, should think twice about these threats. Does it not worry you that the possibility of Russia using tactical nuclear weapons on a country very close to you?
I think that Putin is still very pragmatic, and also he's playing well on our fears. And we have witnessed through the years these military exercises of nuclear weapon. So this is not something new. But what do I know is that Putin is afraid of NATO. Putin is afraid of the real steps against his regime. I'm just giving you one example. Small country, but Estonian president announced the law that we are going to use the Russian frozen assets, private and public. And we got already a pretty straightforward response about that. So actually Putin is afraid about our steps. But the problem is we too many times we're saying, no, we are not doing this, we are not doing that. And the third thing, and we really giving all our strategical thinking publicly to Putin. And he's playing with us. So I'm not afraid about these nuclear threats, because a rational person as Putin is, he knows that NATO is much more stronger, and also he has everything to lose if he is going to use this nuke on political level. Military level, he won't win anything.
There are those that are worried about it. And who is the most timid, would you say, in the alliance? Who's the most worried about this, and who is taking that threat seriously? Is it in Washington where that threat is being taken too seriously, do you think?
Of course, nobody wants to escalate. But as well, we must understand that elections in US are coming, and this pressure is pretty hard in US. And the debate is really, how to say, very aggressive. But also in Europe, I see that too many countries are thinking that business as usual, as it was before the war, can continue. But this is not right. It cannot, because the world has changed a lot, and we have to think about and also act already about the further the architecture of security in Europe. So that's we are as well raising the questions on NATO summit about our own plans and also the defense investments. So this is something we have to do.
Well, let's recap that breaking news at the top of the programme. President Biden has given Ukraine permission to use US-made weapons to strike inside Russia. That's according to at least 2 US officials quoted by the AP news agency at least, but on the condition that they only hit targets near the area of Hakim. It comes after weeks of debate among world leaders and diplomats. And here's a reminder of what's been said by leaders in recent days and weeks.
Just as Russia is striking inside Ukraine, you can quite understand why Ukraine feels the need to make sure it's defending itself, it's getting the Russians out of its country, and it has the ability to strike back.
Every step along the way, we've adapted and adjusted as necessary. And so that's exactly what we'll do going forward. We're always listening, we're always learning, and we're always making determinations about what's necessary to make sure that Ukraine can effectively continue to defend itself.
The time has come to consider some of these restrictions to enable the Ukrainians to really defend themselves.
Qui vous montre le sol ukrainien, oui.
This map shows you that Ukrainian soil is in fact under attack from bases in Russia.
Qui sont en Russie.
So how do we explain to the Ukrainians that we're going to have to protect these towns and basically everything we're seeing around Kharkiv at the moment if we tell them that you are not allowed to hit the point from which the missiles are fired?
I find it strange when some people argue that it is not allowed to defend itself and is not allowed to take the necessary measures to do so. That has never been demanded by us, by other states in Europe, and also by friendly international states, and it never will be.
So quite a range of positions there, and now a shift, it seems, in the American position as well. Let's get some reaction to all that now. With me is Germany's ambassador to the UK, Miguel Berger. Ambassador, thanks for joining us. So we just heard from your Chancellor there. It's not entirely clear what he's saying, but to quote what he says, he says, Ukraine has every opportunity to do so in the framework of international law. We could talk about that in a minute, but first of all, what do you make of these reports from Washington that America does seem to be fairly dramatically shifting its position towards those who want to see the gloves come off to allow the Ukrainians to hit Russian targets on Russian soil?
Yeah, Dominic, I mean, what we have seen in the last days and as a result of Russia's offensive around Kharkiv is a new debate about how far we should go. I'm not sure where the US really stands because we have seen the Secretary of State, Blinken, arguing in favor of using US weapons. You know, what the Chancellor has said is simply to make clear that under international law, Ukraine has the right to attack inside Russia because it's their self-defense. But in the end, those countries who have delivered the weapons must take individual decisions. And to be honest, I'm not sure that every country wants to do that in a public way. Maybe they communicate it to the Ukrainian military, to the Ukrainian leadership, but I'm not sure that everybody is interested to present that openly.
Insofar as you can be public, I mean, it's fair to say the Chancellor's been fairly legalistic in what he said. He's not saying forthrightly that, yes, Ukraine should attack Russian bases from which Russia's been launching these devastating attacks. He's slightly more mealy-mouthed about it, isn't he, to be honest?
He repeated what is valid under international law. But, you know, in the end, we have to look which countries have delivered weapons which really can strike Russian bases which are used for the attacks on Kharkiv. And that is currently mainly about those who have delivered long-range missiles. So Germany has delivered howitzers, but no long-range missiles. So for us, it's not so much on the agenda than for other countries.
But I mean, more broadly speaking, what's your sort of interpretation of what's going on in Washington? As you say, we seem to have sort of double messaging going on. The White House saying one thing, the State Department saying the other. You're more privy to the diplomacy in all this. What's holding America back here?
I think what is holding back is the concern that this might be interpreted in Russia as a direct escalation.
Is that a problem, though? Is that being overly timid? Should they not be calling Putin's bluff?
No, I would not call that timid. I think, you know, when two superpowers with thousands of nuclear warheads are cautious in the way they deal with each other, I think that is very sensitive policy. But I also have the feeling that the debate is shifting as a result of Russia's renewed aggression on Kharkiv.
Because we heard from Estonia's Foreign Minister there, but also from Egers Rinkovic, the Lithuanian president today, Latvian president earlier this week, saying that the West, both men, saying that the West does not have a clear strategy. It's not clear enough strategy. It's not entirely clear the West wants Ukraine to win this war. Does Germany want Ukraine to win the war and for Russia to be defeated?
Absolutely, we want Ukraine to win the war. That is no doubt about it. Have we been altogether too slow to deliver the necessary ammunition and weapons? I would say yes.
Because the perception is, of course, that Germany dragged its heels over tanks, dragged its heels over fighter jets, and now is not at the forefront of people saying they should be able to use their weapons to attack Russian bases.
But Dominic, there I would really say Germany is by far the leading country in Europe on supporting Ukraine. 28 billion military aid. Nobody comes really close to that. And air defense, we have just delivered a new Patriot system, new Iris-T system. So I would say if everybody would do what Germany is doing, we would be in a different position.
And what's at stake, do you think? How worried are you by the way things are going in Ukraine? What's at stake if the West doesn't get its act together?
We have to get our act together, and we are all worried. We are worried, and it has a lot to do, obviously, with waiting 6-7 months for the US decision to come, which was so fundamental, the 61 billion, which will be delivered now on military aid, but we have to increase industrial production, ammunition production. And let me say, we are on a good way. Only to give you one example, Rheinmetall, the German company, is producing more artillery ammunition than the whole of the US.
But it's 2 years in. It's too late, isn't it? Time's running out.
Yes, we are running out. Ministers are now in Prague. The Czech Republic has launched a fantastic initiative on ammunition. The Baltic countries, which you have mentioned, have done a lot. I would say we are on a good path, but we need to close the gap in the coming months.
Ambassador, great to get your insights and your clarification on all those points. Thank you for joining us on The World. Thank you. So we could see an escalation as a result of tonight's decision, and what happens then? Well, in preparation for the possibility of a wider conflict, NATO has been holding its biggest military exercises since the Cold War. Our Europe correspondent Siobhan Robbins saw them firsthand and sends this report from Lithuania.
NATO's rolling out the big guns. In Lithuania, soldiers show how they can defend Europe's eastern flank from invasion. This displays part of the largest NATO exercise since the Cold War. Reassurance for allies, a warning to President Putin.
Today's exercise sends a clear message, a message of deterrence to Russia.
90,000 troops have taken part in drills over the past 6 months on land, sea and in the air. As Ukraine struggles on the real battlefield, the war games on the eastern border have added significance. This is NATO's front line should the war in Ukraine bubble over, and Russia is the biggest threat to the Baltic states, including Lithuania, so defences are being bolstered. Dominating this drill, Germany, keen to show how it could protect its NATO neighbours. Russian aggression has made defence a priority for Berlin, now against the clock to make a military short of cash, weapons and troops fit for war.
We have 5 to 8 years. And 5 to 8 years when the reconstitution of the Russian forces is at a level that an attack against NATO territory might be possible. For me as a military, 5 to 8 years means I have to be ready in 5 years.
That threat's also why 5,000 German troops will soon be stationed here in Lithuania. A welcome deterrent for Romantis, who's fought the Russians before.
I remember perfectly the system what we lived in, so I don't want times to come back, and I don't want my children to live in such a country as the Soviet Union.
And NATO doesn't want that either. This time they were drills, but under attack there'll be no playing games. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Lithuania.
Well, the jury in Donald Trump's hush money trial are into the 11th hour now of their deliberations. The former US president is charged with 34 counts of falsifying business records to hide a payment to the porn star Stormy Daniels to keep her quiet about an affair she claimed she had with Trump. He denies the charges, of course. Our US correspondent James Matthews is in New York. James, thanks for joining us. Any further developments since we last spoke?
Well, 11th hour and counting, Dominic. We've had 2 days of deliberations. I can tell you the jury is going to be sent home in the next few minutes. So we'll be going into day 3. They spent much of today revisiting testimony from the 5 weeks of evidence. Their interest was in rehearing evidence to do with a 2015 Trump Tower meeting between David Pecker, former publisher of the National Enquirer magazine, the man who told Donald Trump at that meeting he would be his eyes and ears, conceal negative stories about him and promote positive stories. The prosecution say that meeting is at the heart of why we are here. What do the Trump camp think about it? Well, I spoke earlier to Donald Trump's lawyer, not his lawyer in this case, but who acts for him in other matters, Alina Habba. Let's listen to what she had to say.
What about the significance of the questions that the jury asked? What do you read into that?
That there's clearly a disagreement, and a disagreement is good for defense. If there's a disagreement, that's a good sign. That means that they're not sure what to do here. And frankly, they're not sure what to do because there was a lot of noise by the prosecution about things that are not relevant and absolutely no evidence of anything that is relevant because there is no crime.
Hi, Dominic. We get our news about what's happening in court from a live text feed. Just looking at what's going on just now, Todd Blanche, Trump's lawyer, and Donald Trump himself continue to chat and smile. Trump, very talkative, it says. He seems quite happy at the end of day 2. We will all be going in to a day 3 tomorrow morning.
James Matthews in New York, thank you for now. This is The World with me, Dominic Waghorn. Next up, Mexico could elect its first ever female president at the weekend, but deadly attacks on candidates continue to mar the campaign. welcome back. Mexico is on the brink of a historic election that's likely to deliver the country's first ever female president. But the campaign has been overshadowed by cartel violence. This week, a mayoral candidate was shot dead at a campaign rally. In total, more than 20 candidates in local elections have been killed this year. We're going to look deeper into what's fueled that violence in a moment. First, let's take a look at the main contenders. And the winner is almost certain to be a woman. The front-runner, Claudia Sheinbaum, is the former mayor of Mexico City. She's promised to continue López Obrador's policies. Not only could she become Mexico's first female president, she would also be the first with a Jewish background leading a country of nearly 100 million Catholics. Her closest rival is opposition candidate Xochitl Gálvez. As a child, she sold street food to help support for her family, but went on to become a tech entrepreneur. And although she's running for one of Mexico's more conservative parties, she supports progressive causes, including the environment, LGBTQ+ rights and abortion. And I'm joined now by Mexican investigative journalist Anabel Hernandez, who's also author of the book Narcoland, The Mexican Drug Lords and Their Godfathers. Anabel, thank you very much for joining us tonight. It does sound like an extraordinary violent election so far. Do we expect, though, the outcome to be less violent and more predictable? It looks like we have a clear front runner.
Yeah, I mean, for this June 2, we are expecting a really very particular election, presidential election in Mexico. This violent environment have never seen before in Mexico. Even we were through many bad times. Never like now. 37 candidates have been murdered in the last months. So we are talking about an election where the organized crime tried to put influence and decide, and not let to the citizens take the decisions.
Have we got James? Anabel, thank you very much. We're going to have to break it off there, I'm afraid, because we do have some news from New York. Reportedly, a verdict has been returned by the jury in the Donald Trump hush money trial. The latest on that, our US correspondent James Matthews is waiting for us in New York. James, what is the latest from the court?
Yeah, hi, Dominic. Well, I can tell you, just 5 minutes ago, Judge Merchan was on the verge of sending the jury home at the end of day 2 of their deliberations. There was a pause whilst he was outside the courtroom. He has come back in to say this. He's had a note from the jury, and I'll quote you what it says. "We, the jury, have a verdict. We would like an extra 30 minutes to fill out the forms if that would be possible." So that's minutes ago from inside the court. The jury are telling the judge they have a verdict in this historic case. They want 30 minutes, they say, to fill out forms. And I'm just looking at the live text feed from inside the court. Donald Trump and his lawyer, Todd Blanche, were chatting quite happily just a few minutes ago. It says here, Blanche and Trump are whispering to each other. Donald Trump, 45th President of the United States, it would appear, is about to learn his fate. Remember, he faces felony charges of having falsified business records with a view to concealing a hush money scheme to hoodwink the American public when they went to the polls at the 2016 election. That is the prosecution's case. A historic trial. It's the first time a former president has been accused in a criminal court in the United States, and it is coming to a close. The jury was sent out yesterday morning. They came back this morning on day 2 of their deliberations. They wanted their memories refreshed about what they clearly regarded as key testimony, and that testimony was at the heart of the prosecution's case. A meeting in 2015 in Trump Tower, and there were 3 men present. Donald Trump, a man by the name of David Pecker, former publisher of the National Enquirer magazine, and Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's lawyer and fixer. At that meeting, there was an agreement that Pecker, the publisher, would publish negative stories about Donald Trump's rivals, positive stories about Donald Trump. He would operate a catch and kill scheme to catch negative stories pay money for them, and make sure they never entered the public arena. These stories would be killed. So he was Trump's big backer. That was 2015, in the months before the election. Just days before the election itself, there were two women who came forward. Karen McDougal, a Playboy model, she was paid $150,000. She was mentioned as a bit part player in this trial. The key player was Stormy Daniels, an adult film star who said that she had a one-night stand with Donald Trump in 2006. Just before the election, she was looking to sell her story. David Pecker, the publisher, found out about this. The lawyer went to pay her $130,000. Now, that was the hush money payment. That wasn't a crime. What the prosecution say was the crime was the way in which that money was rinsed through the books of the Trump organization. Trump paid it, they say, to the lawyer, calling it legal expenses, not calling it a hush money payment to a porn star. Prosecution say that was the false recording of a business record, therefore it was a crime, a misdemeanor crime. But it was made more serious by the timing because it was just before the election. And they say that was an effort to commit election fraud. That's an E-class felony. If Donald Trump is found guilty, technically, he could face up to 4 years in prison. Realistically, he will almost certainly not, because he's a first-time, non-violent offender. Should he be convicted, should he have to be sentenced, that won't happen immediately. He will be brought back to the court at a later date. And there will be an appeal if he is convicted. And that will take some time, probably push that appeal process beyond the November election. But we're looking at a verdict inside the next 20 to 25 minutes. If that is a conviction, then clearly that happens not just legally, but politically. It is a watershed moment, this verdict, whatever it is, because of the historic nature of it. The first time a former president has been the accused in a criminal court in the United States. Julie Rendelman has been with us over the course of this 5-week trial. Julie, deliberations over 2 days. Here we are at the end of day 2. The jury say they have a verdict. What's in your mind?
So I know you want to ask me what I think the verdict is, and I cannot answer. I think because I'm always wrong. There's such anticipation. I think anyone who's tried a case on either side knows that this is just the most monumental moment. And I'll be honest, this is the most monumental moment because we're dealing with the former president of the United States, the potential future president of the United States. So I think everyone is watching. My phone keeps ringing off the hook. What do I think? What do I think? And we're about to find out.
Great. More from you very, very soon, Julie. But let me just read you, Dominic, some of the live text that we're getting from inside court. I think this has rather caught people outside court and possibly inside rather by surprise. But let me read you and give you a sense of what's going on inside. The Trump table has gone from smiling to sour. They are very serious now. And Trump has his arms crossed in front of his chest. There's a growing presence of court security in the hallways and the courtrooms. The head of court security for inside the courthouse walked quickly into the courtroom just before the verdict, or news of the verdict was coming, taking out his keys to the jury room. Trump, Donald Trump's son, who has been in court today and been in court over a number of days, he left the courtroom briefly and returned. Alina Habba, Trump's lawyer, not for this case, but generally and for other cases, civil fraud and so on, business fraud and so on. She's now joined the Trump allies in the first 2 rows. On the district attorney's side, the prosecution, the staff has cleared the first row of the gallery to make room for the 4 alternative members, unused alternates of the jury who will be seated there. Command staff, it says, from the officers for the New York courts are in and out of the courtroom. Trump seated, arms crossed, as he and his lawyer Todd Blanche occasionally whisper to each other. Trump, it says here, looks po-faced and resigned. Any levity seems to have dissipated from the defence table. His attorneys are hardly speaking now. So clearly a moment of high tension for all concerned, specifically the man at the centre of all of this, Donald Trump. Julie Rendelman, we don't know what the verdict's going to be, but we are 2 days into deliberations now. There are three possibilities: not guilty, guilty, and a mistrial. A mistrial would be the scenario where the jury can't agree. It has to be a unanimous verdict. Sure. Now, had this gone on longer, the longer it goes on, the more one thinks there is a mistrial because there is disagreement. 2 days strikes me as a relatively quick verdict for what was a complicated case. Do you agree?
I agree with you. Look, now we know it's either guilty or not guilty. There's no question, there's no mistrial, unless they somehow got the verdict sheet wrong when they're reading it. I do think it's extremely fast, whether it's guilty or not. And to your point of how complicated the case was, how much evidence there was going in, the cross-examination. So I do think whatever the verdict is, it is a pretty quick one. Interesting that everyone agreed so quickly.
And the case, Julie, this complicated case, complicated for many reasons. It's a story that has many twists and turns. Legally, it started with the falsification of business records, sure, and the prosecution has bolted on this crime of election fraud. Explain what they've done there and perhaps why that's controversial.
So I think the controversy is, they took a case kind of that there were questions in regards to the word falsification of records because the argument was that these were really legal fees. That was part of the start of it. And also remember, these were misdemeanors. And so in a sense, the argument from the other side is the DA was looking for something to upgrade these misdemeanors, which are relatively less serious, to find some way to make them felonies. And they did so by using several theories, one being election fraud. Many people think there's some problems with that, and that eventually, if he's found guilty, there will be appealable issues regarding those. And that it could mean, if there's a conviction, that conviction is reversed.
You're a criminal defense attorney, Julie. You've been in court at moments like this. Talk to me about the tension. What's in your mind? What's in the mind of the accused? So
it's interesting because we were noting how talkative Donald Trump was just a few moments ago. There was almost levity in the room, in a sense, on both sides. And it took a very quick turn. My guess is that Trump's team believes there's probably likely going to be a conviction. That is my guess. Again, who am I to speculate? But I think there's tensions until you hear that juror four-person say the words guilty or not guilty. I think everyone's holding their breath.
All right, Julie, stay with us. Much more to come. Let me just interject with what we're told is going on in court. No sign of the jury coming back in yet. But Donald Trump and Todd Blanche, his lawyer, we're told, still seated shoulder to shoulder. There's now distance between their heads. Blanche just whispered to Donald Trump, there is no merriment as there was before. Josh Steinglass, the prosecutor, he's looking down, and the author of this says that from where I sit, he appears to be jotting notes, perhaps to remind himself what requests the people, the government, the prosecutors will have in the event of a guilty verdict of any kind. Trump and Blanche, they're chatting again, but in a much more serious manner, we're told. Blanche now whispering to Trump again, covering his hand. The court officers are admonishing those in the public gallery not to use their binoculars so that their private conversations can't be seen. There is an overflow room where the overspill is populated. They, we're told, are still able to use their binoculars in that room, the overflow room. Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's lawyer, has his hands clasped as if he is praying, we're told. Now the District Attorney Alvin Bragg and his team, the prosecutors, they've entered and taken up an entire row. The prosecution team who have brought this historic trial are there in full in court to be there, physically present for its denouement. It's now been 30 minutes since the jury, 4 persons, signed the note asking for 30 more minutes. The judge not on the bench, the jury still not in the room, but one imagines they won't be far. The process is that the jury passes the note into the court, notifies the judge that they have reached a verdict, and then the court in full assembles. The man at the centre, of course, Donald Trump, as the accused. Julie Rendelman, the judge not in court yet, the jury not in court yet. What's going on? What are the practicalities at a moment like this? Because it comes down to practicalities, assembling the jury and everybody concerned.
So usually they'll have the defendant and his team come in, the prosecution and their team come in. The jury, remember, wanted a little more time because they wanted to, in a sense, fill out the verdict sheet correctly. Because remember, there's 34 counts. And so Judge Merchan I think also there's security issues. So I think they want everything in place. I mean, we're already hearing helicopters above us. The minute we heard there was a verdict, we heard helicopters. I think momentarily he's going to come in the courtroom. He's going to let them know that there's a note, that there's a verdict. And he's going to bring in the jury, and they're going to read it. Once they read it, there's going to be a polling, I assume, by the defense that's going to ask each and every juror to agree that that is, in fact, their verdict.
He faces 34 counts, 34 charges. They're all related to the one crime, aren't they? Now, the 34 charges, they're made up of invoices, vouchers, essentially ledger entries, and checks that were signed. So lots of bits of paperwork.
Sure.
34 bits of paperwork going into the one charge. It's not just one spoken word of one verdict. We will hear, as I understand it, the verdict 34 times.
Correct.
They might not necessarily be the same. Talk us through that.
So I'd be surprised if they're not the same. The reason I say that is because they wanted time to fill it out. My guess is they've agreed that it's all or nothing. And if it's nothing, then they're going down not guilty. If it's everything, it's guilty. So I would be shocked at this point if they come back with some type of split verdict where it's guilty on some and not guilty on another.
Yeah, so when they talk about give us 30 minutes to fill out the forms, that's what they're talking about, their paperwork.
I think so, exactly. They need it filled out, and they need it filled out correctly.
Okay, just some more, Julie, from inside court. Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's lawyer, is now leaning back, we're told, breathing deeply as Donald Trump awaits his fate, which is now minutes away. Josh Steinglass, the prosecutor, he has his eyes on the door where the jury will enter. Eric Trump, Donald Trump's son, and Alina Habba, his lawyer, they're next to each other in the front row of the public gallery. Court officers are telling the television pool, that's the camera that records the corridor where we have seen Donald Trump issue so many statements on his way in and out of courtroom number 1530 on the 15th floor. Court officers telling that pool camera they can either stay in the overflow room or stay out in the hallway for the whole time the verdict is being read. The floor, we're told, the 15th floor of the criminal court building may lock down. So these are the logistics, clearly, and the practicalities around this verdict as we wait for the jury to assemble, Dominic. But, you know, a historic verdict, and it's on its way.
James, thank you for that. As we wait for the verdicts, James, let's look back over the last 4 weeks. We've seen 20 witnesses called by the prosecution, 2 called by the defence. We didn't hear from Donald Trump, who chose not to take the stand. It was a momentous event inside the court, but outside it felt more like a circus looking on from here. What was the mood like for you covering it? What were the highlights and the lowlights for you as you look back over this more than 4 weeks of extraordinary testimony inside the court and the extraordinary events outside?
The mood, the mood's been interesting. What struck me, Dominic, is how at the start the media was here in force. It was a big deal. It was a big story. It's always been a big story, but over the course of the 5 weeks, the media thinned out, the crowds thinned out. I look across at the park today where the police have corralled protesters for and against Donald Trump. You know, it's populated today, but over the course of the 5 weeks, things went relatively quiet as this process worked itself through. I wondered if there was an element of trial fatigue, an element of having heard this story all before. And people, frankly, didn't feel the need to attend court on a daily basis because it was something of an old story. I mean, it's a year since Donald Trump was first arraigned. But there's no getting away from it today. And right now, there is a sense of occasion. There's a sense of numbers. There is a sense of tension inside court number 1530. You get that from the live text feed and the imminent nature of this verdict. It's been a circus. There's no getting away from that. I mean, this week we had Robert De Niro railing against Donald Trump, telling Sky News he thought he was a monster. Prior to that, on a daily basis, we had supporters of Donald Trump making their way by convoy down from Capitol Hill. Speaker Mike Johnson and others giving a daily press conference, denigrating this court process, denigrating the American justice system, echoing the sentiments of Donald Trump. And that raises all sorts of questions, of course, about respect for the rule of law in this country. This is a man, of course, who is running for the presidency, may be president again. And, you know, there are all sorts of political questions asked over the course of this trial, certainly to be asked in the wake of a verdict, because it will have an impact, whatever that verdict is. We've seen the polls. This is a man who's running for the presidency. There are polls that indicate, should he be convicted of a felony, then a significant number of American voters, independent, also Republicans, would switch their vote to Biden. So there is much that hinges on this for Donald Trump personally, much hinging on this in terms of, you know, the legality and the justice system, but also for the future of the country. It quite literally is a jury verdict that could dictate the course of this country for the foreseeable future. A decision, a verdict that could decide November's US election. So the biggest decision a jury in the United States has made for some time, perhaps the biggest ever, and it is not far away. Let me just read you some of the live text that's coming out of court within the past couple of minutes. Todd Blanche, Trump's lawyer, is looking very anxious, we're told. He's rubbing his hand over his face. Trump now conferring with his other lawyer. All eyes, we're told, are on the door to the jury room. Josh Steinglass, the prosecutor, looks glum, his head resting on his fist. Clearly anxiety on both sides of the aisle inside courtroom number 1530. It appears the only Trump family member inside the courtroom is Eric Trump. And at 5 p.m., Judge Juan Merchan has entered the courtroom. Good afternoon, he says. Please be seated. So the judge has taken his seat. Prosecution taken his seat. The defense have taken their seat. We await the jury with their historic verdict.
Good evening. You're watching Sky News at 10. Breaking news tonight, and the jury has returned in the Donald Trump hush money trial. It's expected in the next few minutes, and Mr. Trump is at court to hear whether or not he will be convicted in a criminal court in the United States. James Matthews is outside the court for us. And James, just take us right back to the beginning and remind viewers of exactly what this case is all about.
Hi, Gillian. Well, this case is about trying to hoodwink the American electorate in the days before the 2016 election. That's the prosecution case. The falsification of business records, essentially a bookkeeping crime. But they said over 5 weeks of evidence that it was about much more than that, because it relates to an affair that Stormy Daniels, an adult film actor, said she had with Donald Trump, a one-night stand in 2006. She met him at a golf tournament, had a one-night stand, spoke about being invited to his hotel suite for dinner, emerged from the bathroom to find Donald Trump reclining in his T-shirt and boxer shorts. They had sex, and that was it. That was that in 2006. But then in 2016, 10 years later, Donald Trump was running for the White House. He didn't want negative stories to come out about him that would impact on his running for office. A video came out that showed him talking in very lewd terms about women. Access Hollywood tape, it was called. It was a scandal. It was a crisis within the Trump camp just in the weeks before the 2016 election. He didn't want any other scandal, but another scandal is what he got. Stormy Daniels came forward. She was trying to sell her story. Friends of Donald Trump found out about this. To silence Stormy Daniels, Trump's lawyer paid her $130,000 to keep quiet. That wasn't a crime. It's not a crime to pay somebody hush money. Donald Trump was duly elected as the president in 2016, and it was the months after that the crime was committed. His lawyer, who'd paid the $130,000, went to Trump to get his money back, to be reimbursed. And he was reimbursed. But the way that was done, it wasn't put through the books as payment to a porn star. It was put through the books as legal expenses. And that was the crime. The crime, a bookkeeping crime essentially, but the falsification of business records to commit election fraud, to silence that story that might have upended his presidential campaign. That's what's brought us here to this court building in Lower Manhattan. And right now, on the 15th floor in courtroom number 1530, a jury is on the verge of delivering its verdict. Around 40 minutes ago, Gillian, they sent a note, after 2 days of deliberation, sent a note to the judge, Juan Marchand, to say that they had a verdict. Could you give us 30 minutes, they said, to fill out the form? And that was 40 minutes ago. So right now, inside that courtroom, and I'm looking at the live text feed, we have the judge on the bench. We have the defense in their seats. We have the prosecution, and we have the accused awaiting his fate. I'm looking at the text feed. Juan Marchand, the judge, are we ready to bring back the jury? Both parties say yes. Seated in the courtroom, we're told, behind Trump are Stephen Chung, Caroline Leavitt, they're his campaign press aides. If they enter the courtroom at all, typically they are seated in the far back. So Donald Trump has his supporters in court. Eric Trump is there, Alina Habba, his lawyer, is there, and he's seated next to his lawyers. We're told they are looking glum, anxious, whereas before the jury announced they had a verdict, Trump appeared to be in good spirits. At the end of day 2 deliberation without a verdict, well, that turned on a couple of minutes, just around 4:30, when the jury were about to be sent home. That's when they sent their note to say, well, hang on, we've decided. Julie Rendelman is a criminal defense attorney. Hi, Julie. They said they needed 30 minutes. That was 40 minutes ago. There's a lot of practicalities to deal with, logistics, getting people into the courtroom. We are going to hear 34 different verdicts. Just talk to me about why that is.
Well, because it's 34 different counts, and so a jury has to make a decision as to each one. There was arguments to be made that a jury could have split the verdict, picked some and not others. But it looks to me, there was no question they had to go through each 34 counts separately.
Actually, just looking at the live text from inside court, Judge Marchand telling those gathered, you may be seated. Do all parties stipulate that all parties are present and properly seated? Yes, comes the answer. Marchand addressing the jurors. Jurors, we received, and I can tell you, the verdicts are in, and Donald Trump, the 45th President of the United States, has been found guilty on 15 counts so far. He has been found guilty of the falsification of business records to commit election fraud, a historic decision made inside a New York courtroom within the past few minutes. A jury has returned and it's delivering, it has 34 verdicts to deliver. We're at 22 and counting, and I can tell you that everyone is guilty. 34 counts that feed in to the single crime of election fraud. A prosecution case that said this was a man who tried to hoodwink, indeed successfully hoodwinked, the American electorate into allowing him to become the 45th president, concealed a story about an affair with a porn star, kept it quiet, silenced her, and that enabled him to enter high office. The counts now at 34, and everyone has a G against it, a G for guilty. Donald Trump, in this historic trial, has been found guilty. And I'm hearing cheers to the left. There is a park opposite the court building with Trump supporters and Trump opponents. And clearly there is a degree of joy amongst those who oppose Donald Trump, who have queued on a daily basis to get inside court, gathered outside court. And a man who has divided this country down the middle divides them once again. You can see it here in New York. Joy on one side of a New York park, despair, anger on the other side. Guilty on all counts. Julie Rendelman, he's guilty. He was the 45th president of the United States. He wants to be president again. What do you make of it?
So, you know, look, I think this is a very quick decision, but also I think if you look at the notes, the jury did hone in on the areas that would provide for them the opportunity to find him guilty. And it does seem to me that they thought that he had falsified the records all along, because they really didn't ask for any details about that at all. It was all about that meeting. And the meeting is kind of the start of the conspiracy, and the jury determined that, in fact, that was. And so, you know, we will not necessarily know which of the bad acts or the secondary crime each juror held on to, because they didn't have to be unanimous in regards to that. But I think, you know, look, this is, in my lifetime, is the first time we're ever seeing the likes of this.
He's been convicted of a crime. He's been processed through a criminal court and been found guilty. It's a huge story.
It is, and the story is not over. And I say that because there is issues regarding sentencing. B, there are a ton of appellate issues that are going to keep this case going for many years to come. And I think C, which is the most practical, most relevant thing, is what, if any, effect will this have on the election?
And talk to me about the sentencing and the process from that.
Sure. So the next step is, I can't believe I'm saying this, that Donald Trump would be interviewed by probation. Probation puts together a sentencing report for the court to make an ultimate decision as to what that sentencing will be. It's usually put out several weeks out. Could it be further out? It could be. And the judge is going to have to make a determination as to whether or not this is a jail-appropriate offense or no jail.
And, you know, there will be an appeal process at some point, probably after the election.
I would expect, yes.
Yeah, and we wouldn't expect Donald Trump to be jailed. Is that correct?
So I do not foresee a scenario that Donald Trump would be jailed for these. Again, these are E, nonviolent felonies. They're the lowest felonies. He has no criminal record throughout his life. I just can't foresee that happening. Again, I've been wrong, but I would be shocked. And I'm not sure that that would be the right decision in regards to Rashawn's position.
Yeah. The U.S. Constitution doesn't prevent anybody who's behind bars from running for the presidency. Eugene Debs did it in 1920 for the Socialist Party. He was jailed for sedition, protesting against World War I. the legal status of somebody who is criminally convicted has to impact on somebody running for